Fates of castles and old country houses. The castles and country houses of old in Hungary represent a legacy both beautiful and burdensome of care and pride to the generation of today. They also tend to fall into decay if left to themselves. These stately houses must be brought back into the country's life, which means they must be put to use while renewing their forms and spirit. Of restoration and renovation of these precious buildings of our past, new life springs up amidst the old mellowed walls. All this leads to the need to redefine such terms as castle, mansion, manor house, country house, hall, etc. These traditional architectural forms, however, are increasingly put into the service of new functions, put to new purposes. At the same time, novel types of activity are getting associated with them. Every change takes time to get used to it. But then, the castle and the country house itself was once the product of a series of historical changes too. It grew out of the fortified castle. As its external appearance gradually shed the defensive functions, so it was by stages turned into the prestigious dwelling place of the great, from the place of refuge it used to be with a deterrent outward look. Sometimes it was transformed merely into a temporary residence. The change these grand houses are undergoing at present are similarly the result of a transition from one age to another. There is some analogy between the birth in olden times and the rebirth today of the country house. Points of resemblance may even be perceived in the multiplicity of forms that country houses developed in earlier periods and the variety of functions that they are seen to be developing at present. As a few centuries ago, castles and grand houses were built for hunting, permanent or merely temporary residential purposes, so today we find a variety of versions, country houses and mansions turned into museums, hotels, or even into cultural homes. A country house is not just a building. A country house is an organization. A country house is a way of life functioning as a unit of hierarchically organized activities. These life forms and activities reflected a specific social organization and stratification for centuries. The architectural forms, divisions and structures and the situation of the country house evolved in accordance with its overall set of functions. The country house is a living organism. If the attempt to resurrect it ignores this fact, it will refuse to be raised from the dead. It will then remain useless, because unexploited. A castle or country house can be divided up or put to partial use only at the expense of its demise. In the end, what organized activities can be given a home and a framework today or in the future by this architectural, social formation that has developed in the course of history? One should think every activity of a kind to which all the necessary catering can be created on the spot, whether it is a form of public catering or any cultural service that we choose to set as the main new function of the reconstructed and reorganized building complex. Grandeur, power, wealth, pomp and refined taste never fail to induce wonder in the contemporaries, and the very same qualities still excite our admiration today. The 18th century man of letters, Georges Béchagny, wrote apropos of Esterházy at the time, "The glory of our nation and our king required that the palace at Esterházy, today Vertøyd, should make itself a wonder. It had to show the world that European standards of taste, nurtured in Paris or London, can find pleasure in Hungary too. And this great amazement will doubtless enhance our country's reputation with all foreign nations." The environment of the country or manor house was always the estate, the village, the countryside. They were erected as centers of larger or smaller regions. Even if later a town grew up around them, the majority of Hungarian mansions are found in the countryside today. Country houses, demanding as they do well-organized services, are suitable in any of their functions to become precursors of urbanization of the country, to become centers combining every useful amenity of urban civilization with the availability of a high degree of cultural facilities. This is in any case a progressive feature of the utilization of large country houses, for it can hardly be questioned that the Hungarian countryside needs and will need in the future more and more attractive centers and focal points of urbanism. The country houses have represented at all times the most advanced lifestyle of their age. This was only natural, as they served the needs of the ruling classes. At the same time, they often became the homes of art collections and remarkable cultural assets by virtue of their architectural values, furniture, fittings, and ornaments. It is well known that the owners of country houses were often themselves propagators, patrons, and practitioners of culture. The castles, country houses are not only well adapted to fulfill their well-chosen functions, but, in contrast to today's public buildings, they're also carriers of cultural historical messages for the present. As Jenő Rodos, the eminent professor of architecture, put it, these oases of a better life have rarely got embroiled in political upheavals, but they prove the fertile ground of burgeoning picture galleries and collections, and were the starting points of so many of our country's institutions, and were the nursing homes of so many of the notabilities of hard-working Hungary. The reconstruction project of castles and country houses is being realized at a pace permitted by the country's intellectual and financial resources. The project unifies largely similar yet often strikingly individual efforts. Every household has its customs. So many country houses, so many programs, so many individual demands, ideas and plans.